I guess we can start now.
How are you?
Are you pretty good? All right, all rise, get the show on the road. Pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And thank you much for being here. And the introductions, I'm George Topple, Union Township trustee, and I guess chair of the meeting. Eman, Dinery, Annie, and then Annie, would you like to, or Eman, why don't you do it?
Okay,
I
Iman
think-
Ibrahim, I'm staffing here with Dinery, the Economy and Place meeting, and I'm a planning manager here at NERC.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, everyone. If you're not familiar, I'm Annie Cruz Porter from the Purdue Center for Regional Development, and we have our draft sets. I hope you all have a copy of that.
Well, we're gonna go around and introduce the rest of the people.
Okay.
Okay, Dinery? Dinery, would you like to tell everybody who you are? We're doing introductions.
Oh, okay, sure. I'm Dinery Kane, the Economic Development District Coordinator for NERC.
Hi, I'm Candace Eklund, NERC staff.
John Epperson, LaPorte County Surveyor.
Dean Button, City of Hammond.
Joe Wazal, Chief Operating Officer for the Northwest Indiana Realtors.
Gary Johnson, Board Chair, Society of Innovators at Purdue Northwest.
Kelly Anthony, U.S. Senator Tadjman. Lois Woodard, President of the Black Chamber of Commerce in Northwest Indiana.
Hello, I work for the Center for Regional Development, work with Amy.
Here in Stillwell, NERC staff.
Doug Ross for the Coastal Union. Matt Babcock, Purdue Northwest.
Good to see you again, long time no see.
Jen Trowbridge with CoAction.
Oh, well, welcome. Okay, did we get everybody? All right, and now it's showtime, so take it away.
Okay, so it's my pleasure to introduce the draft sets, and I thought we could go over different parts of it. We could ask questions, and I'd really like your input. So that's basically what this meeting is for. So we have some different sections about the region. Indranil wrote the economic framework and the economic performance indicators. We have the planning context and the structure. We talk about the qualitative input and public engagement. We presented many of these to you in the past. We have the goals. And then lastly, we have the evaluation framework.
And if I could interject briefly, I erred and forgot to get the minutes approved, so if we could move back to that, I apologize. Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes that can vote on that? And I entertain a motion. Well, we don't need a motion to approve, but someone who would like to.
Motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any comments? There being no objections, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed signify by saying nay. The motion carries. And now back to the show.
Okay.
Hi, I just want to add one more thing, George, there were no public comments.
Okay, there were no public comments. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I want to give a quick overview of the SEDS document. So I just wrote a little bit about the region, how industrial development and knowledge exchange between Indiana and Illinois have had a long history here, and how there's many diverse industries and employers. I kind of wanted to center it and kind of set the stage for some of the goals that we're going to go over in a minute. And that it really is a unique location because it's bound by Lake Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois. It has some really, some significant national gems like the Indiana Dunes National Park and the Indiana Dunes State Park. So we move on to the economy section, I wanted to kind of highlight that this is a transitioning economy. It's transforming, I would say. There's also very strong, has a very strong historical industrial base, and transportation is a key feature of this region. I wanted to highlight the cultural and social life and really pull out some, significant places from each of the 3 counties. These can also be changed. And then I wanted to, this we presented to you in the past. We removed Michigan, but we highlighted and we updated the number of advanced computing related courses within the region, and also the greater Chicagoland area, to kind of highlight, I guess, the workforce and talent pipeline potential that you have here in areas adjacent to here. Okay. So the planning context of this document, that this gives, the history of what we've been talking about. The project started in October 2024. We've had the forums and the public engagement sessions within the 3 counties. And really, we also talked about the guiding principles and the SED structure in previous meetings, that there needs to be partnerships and regional alignment, distributed growth, economic stabilization, and growth. Again, all of these can be changed ahead of the final SEDS. So economic performance indicators, Indranil worked on this section, and we wanted to pull some of the data into this, the number of all jobs within the NERC region, how that compares to the Chicago, Naperville, Elgin region, and also Indiana in general. So this, it gives you an indication of the percentage of jobs changing, the cost of living, the number of establishment sales, the gross regional product for all 3 locations. We talked about how regional businesses and industries produced $57.2 billion worth of goods and services in 2023, and how 60% of those inputs or supply chain demands were obtained from outside of the NERC region, and that there is an economic leakage or imports of about $34.3 billion in 2023. Then the job growth and cost of living. The cost of living is slightly below the United States average. The cost of living indices for Indiana is 95.6. In the Chicago region, it's 103, but here it is 93.8. So it's below both of those. And lastly, we discussed some of the industry cluster competitiveness and specializations. And going into this meeting, Denery and I were kind of talking about the goals. And I think one of the ways that you can really think about the industrial clusters, and that we're really trying to drill down to within the SEDS document, comes from what I wrote on this whiteboard here. So overarching, we have energy and advanced computing, okay? And the idea behind the SEDS is these 2 feed into pharmaceuticals, machinery manufacturing, and primary metals, which are the 3 traditional clusters, and also entrepreneurship, okay? And that all then feeds the regional innovation component. So that is the overarching view of the SEDS and of goal number 1. So I want to go to goal 1. So goal 1 is economic diversification and innovation. And the idea is to create a robust network of forward-thinking initiatives around legacy and emerging industry clusters to fuel innovative growth. Goal 2 is about workforce resiliency and how to develop and attract and retain a skilled workforce by building on collaboration among Northwestern Indiana's education and training organizations, and we'll touch upon that. And then lastly, the quality of place element. Okay, so this is really the meat of the document, the SEDS goals. So that should be, I think, on page 24 for you. So the first part, I kind of I try to outline this, but in a verbal form. And so I was talking to Dennery, we're going to put this in a graph, so it's more easily understood within that text, okay? So the idea for industrial diversification is that you really kind of, you bolster these three through energy and advanced computing. So the idea is that they're emerging spheres of influence, I think you could call them that, and they're going to heavily influence the direction of these 4 areas for the region in the future. And it really lays this goal number 1 lays the foundations to support the opportunities that are going to come out of a forward-thinking, the initiatives that come from this. So there's the current NERC economy hosts a number of growing, stable, and legacy clusters. But what we're trying to do is position advanced computing and energy into these, because you want, for example, pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical manufacturing. So how can advanced computing, whether it's AI or quantum, influence the development of pharmaceuticals in this region? And also, the landscape is the BioWorks, which is the Tech Hub grant that Indiana secured. There's the Quantum Exchange out of the Chicago area. And there is the Hydrogen Hub that has potential. So it's really trying to bring all of these initiatives that touch upon this area and try to, I think, capture some of the spillover leakages that are going to happen within the region. Okay, so the number one objective is ecosystem formation and foundation. So you really need a good basis from which to grow and support these industries. So we propose that NERC arrange for regional nonprofits and partner organizations to join industrial cluster groups, which would include, and then the idea would have representatives from businesses, academia, governmental entities, and relevant industry or industrial associations. And then businesses in the cluster would be identified using jobs posting data. And then, so part of NERC's job in this would to help build awareness of the ecosystem project and use some of the cluster data among potential ecosystem partners that we've been using to bolster your knowledge of the clusters throughout this entire project, and form sub-working groups such as those around data centers, pharmaceuticals, or cybersecurity. And then support the development of and provide resources such as data or industry experts for advanced computing, for the advanced computing industry cluster. And it should be noted that support really could vary from simply hosting and convening meetings to doing cluster-specific research. And these resources will vary based on feedback that you receive from your ecosystem partners, so from companies and other partners. And then lastly, build awareness of the quantum corridor to the identified industry clusters and entrepreneurs throughout the region. And I put within a box here just, kind of an idea, for example, of using IoT data. That could be one potential direction of one of these industrial cluster ecosystem groups. Any questions about the first objective? Yes.
talked about the job posting data being used as a way to identify the very specific companies within that industrial cluster ecosystem. I suspect we'll have to do a lot more reconnaissance than just that
Yes.
in order to identify all the relevant companies within our region that could potentially be participants in that ecosystem.
Yes, yes. So for example, you might need to contact the different chambers of commerce within the different counties. You will probably need to talk to, although, you know, sometimes firms don't know who else is located within the region, so I don't know if that would potentially be a good source of information. We can provide the Hoover's database information to you that we have. I mean, I would say that you would have a good 100, 200 contacts. And then you could just look for what that network is. That's really what you want to kind of feel out. How big is that network? What's the scale of that network for the ecosystem? And it will take you several months to do that kind of research and lay that groundwork.
A couple of comments. One is we have talked in prior meetings about the threat to the steel industry
Yes.
in Northwest Indiana. That's not specifically mentioned, and I think I can understand why, that you're more focused on what you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason that it might be worth some sort of mention is so that it introduces a sense of urgency.
Okay.
And it's not that it's going to go away in 5 years, but when we talk about building emerging clusters,
It's because,
yes,
right, it's because of what's
yes.
happening.
And the emerging clusters are a long-term project. They're not going to happen in a few years.
That's right.
So I think there's some value in building a sense of urgency around that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had also identified other aspirational clusters. You do get to the bioworks, but there's also the semiconductor
That's right.
activity, and then there's also at least,
But semiconductors can go under advanced computing.
well, it could, but it doesn't have to. That there may be opportunities to work within the semiconductor work that aren't related to advanced computing.
That's
I'm not
true.
sure what they are, but I think the first step is to study where the opportunities are in the BioWorks project and in the semiconductor cluster and maybe the medical devices cluster that exists in the Fort Wayne, Warsaw area. That's also an adjacent important cluster that has manufacturing.
Yes, it does. Yeah,
So
it is.
That's a thought. And I also think that because all of those exist within the state of Indiana and are being significantly funded, and that includes the hydrogen cluster, the energy cluster as well, that it's kind of worth mentioning that Northwest Indiana is looking for opportunities to collaborate with other funded initiatives within the state. I think that it adds kind of a sense of power to what we're trying to do.
If I could make a mention now, there's been a lot of pushback on a number of issues with emerging industries in our communities. I don't know if it's because the information is not there for them to understand, or if it's just a typical pushback that people don't want things to change.
For example?
Well, for example, the data center proposal in Union Township.
Well, I think there's pretty good reasons for my own opinion.
Well, I know, I mean,
But when we look for opportunities to do other things, it would be more, in my view, things that existing businesses could do. that is there a way for a manufacturing company here to adapt what it's doing to the needs of some of these adjacent economic activities?
And I think comprehensive plan probably is necessary for, and we're doing a comprehensive plan in the county, but I'm not sure how thorough it is. I know that specific areas would probably benefit from having a better idea of what's planned for that community, well in advance of major projects being proposed. So I don't know how we either provide education or provide information in advance and figure out where things are going, where are we going and how do we get there? And so that people aren't surprised and they don't feel like they're having information held back from them and all of a sudden they have it dropped out. I don't know how to express this because I still don't know too much about the project. I haven't even seen the proposal, but apparently the Freedom of Information came out on that particular project, and I've heard all kinds of things that have been of concern, but I don't know what's true and what's not, and what the total impact is. So I don't know, but it affects the ecosystem as well because of the tremendous amount of energy and water and alleged noise level. I hear that can be dissipated in different ways now. But these are some of the issues that are being brought up, and it's a true concern to the people. And I think we need to know where, in overall, where we can put these things where they should be. I'm not saying I'm opposed or for a project such as that. I just don't know enough about it to be able to speak to it. But I think that's where most people feel in the pushback that we get. And this is just one project, but there have been a number of projects where this is taking place. I don't know if I'm making myself clear or not, but it's just something food for thought.
I think, George, for the purpose of the SEDS, I think what Gary is suggesting is we kind of set the stage better. We say, here's what's happening in Indiana, and Northwest Indiana wants to be a part of it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, but I think that's part of what I'm saying.
Yeah, and so what you're talking about is when that becomes a project reality and you're now drilled down to a site and a location. This SEDS will never be able to address those kind of issues. It can, of course, talk about the fact that we're on the cusp of change, and change is sometimes uncomfortable, and we have to provide information so people can get comfortable with change. But I do think the fact that the state as a whole has embraced these big initiatives, these nationwide initiatives, means it's very important that we put a flag out there saying, we're interested too. Absolutely. Don't forget about us. And I think that's the purpose of the SEDS. It doesn't dismiss the very, I guess, boots on the ground reality that you're dealing with. And I think maybe there can be some language about the fact that change is going to come and it's going to involve decisions that are perhaps uncomfortable for people.
So perhaps something that can be covered in the SEDS then is how the funnel works, if you will. From how does it go from the conversation here to what local communities need to do in order to be prepared?
Well, I'm sorry, I don't think you had.
Oh, sorry.
You didn't have an opportunity to introduce yourself when we went around.
Oh, sorry. Adrian Bittner, Economic Development Director, Northwest Indiana RDA.
Okay.
Why don't we try to work with both George's micro level concern and Gary's
some kind of like awareness,
yeah.
like prepping communities.
Well, the data center issue is front and center in a lot of areas, and the whole AI explosion and everything.
It's here.
All kinds of reactions. I think George is going relative to some incredible knowledge relative to their impact or not, and it's something that is just going to be put upon us, or is it something we're going to try to manage, or something we're going to try to avoid? think those things, I'm not sure we have to address it specifically in this document, but it would, at least I think to Denver's point, we should acknowledge that it's a big issue out there right now. It's similar to what we went through a few years back with ethanol. Ethanol is going to be everywhere, and we're not convert all this corn to alcohol and burning it in our cars, or the other stuff was the telecom explosion. Those are 2 or 3 big events that happened previous to this. Going back to the document, I had a couple other comments. One was, and I'm sorry, this is the last meeting, but can you tell me a little bit about the focus on chemicals and glass?
Yeah, that's pharmaceuticals essentially, and pharmaceutical.
Back at the pharmaceutical piece, the chemicals and glass piece, I'm not aware of much of that around here.
We went through.
Oh, you already went through all this stuff?
Yeah,
okay.
we have. We were having a hard time in the cluster. For example, one of the original clusters they identified was mining, and no one had any idea what that
Sand mining, right? Yeah, but whatever.
But as we got into chemicals, the part of it that seemed to stick was the potential for pharmaceuticals.
Okay, well,
Apparently is in that cluster.
Well, that sounds
So
good.
I have that.
Yes.
I'm sure, derivatives from oil to fertilizer, so it's, but the other.
Don, if I can interrupt, we're in a bit of a transition because we're dealing with the traditional clusters, yet Annie's organization is in the middle of an EDA-funded project to identify and kind of revamp the whole cluster.
Yes, that is right.
Organization.
Well, thank you. So, and then to that end, the other thing that I feel is somewhat missing is, and I don't think it's too old hat, but I was surprised not to see much focus on food processing and food development. Did you already go through that last time?
We identified the clusters based on location quotient.
Yeah, the location quotients for the 3 counties in total, and then committee members voted on the ones that they wanted to concentrate on.
So the location cluster is whether or not we have more or less than the national average participation in a particular cluster. Okay. I'd like to get back to this for just a second, because when we talk about artificial intelligence, it strikes me that building a data center is the least attractive way imaginable to participate in that cluster. Takes a lot of power, takes a lot of space, doesn't create very many jobs. And the way that if you were to say, how would you like to participate, it would be way up the value-added chain of creating software or something like that. I mean, you could think of all the programming that's going to have to be done around artificial intelligence, and then when you couple that with quantum computing, when quantum computing becomes a reality, none of the existing coding is going to work. It all has to be reprogrammed differently.
Well, some of the benefits could be, for the local schools to be able to participate in training.
Well, of course.
And all those other things, and also this project is, I think, I don't know the exact number of acres, but I think 756 acres or 760.
Yeah.
But it's a large piece of.
I'm saying that
30
is
square
the
miles
least
there, and that's a pretty good
desirable way
piece
to
of it.
participate in artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Building a data center.
Yeah, and then everybody has all kinds of ideas of, how Lake Louise is going to be drained because of the use of water. Okay. And I mean, some things are true statements, and some things seem to be quite far.
I think the big question is whether the data center attracts more jobs related to that type of computing.
And, restaurants, and infrastructure, and that sort of thing, parks, is part of the whole comprehensive plan for that area, and not just boom.
All right, so the other piece that comes into funding local government is, so our primary funding for local government is property taxes. So if somebody drops $1 billion on you, that's a big positive hit, and probably lowers taxes across the whole county. So,
and my understanding is more than one of those fees.
Anyway, as we look at these opportunities, I hope that when we go to the next level of what are the opportunities, that we look at the high value added parts of it.
Knowledge, the capital.
Exactly, the human capital part of it.
Human capital part, well educated, highly paid.
Do you anticipate having like kind of a cost benefit matrix on it, to your point about the data centers and the land and whether or not, you know, Don's point about jobs and ancillary benefits or whatever, it's kind of, you know, kind of one of those things where it's like, takes up a lot of land, takes up a lot of power, takes up a lot of water, doesn't provide the taxes, doesn't have the jobs, you know, what are those things? You know, you could have an office smaller than this, employing 25 people, they're all making $500,000.
Exactly.
That you could put in any city or town in Northwest Indiana as long as they had access to the right, you know, internet. And you know, as we talk about the quantum corridor and the access to dark fiber and things of that nature, looking at those cost benefit analysis, because even though we have a ton of industry, there's a ton of brownfields, and property that is unavailable for redevelopment for a long time, and the amount of money that it's going to take to redevelop these sites, you know, it's a negative for quite some time before you could put them into productive use. So when we're talking about these various land uses, and to your point about do communities want these things here, data centers probably aren't in anybody's comprehensive plan or an allowable land use in somebody's zoning code. So when we're talking about this, you know, there's zoning codes that haven't been updated since the 60s that contemplate, you know, current land uses that somebody should be allowed to do by right because it wasn't contemplated when the code itself was written. You know, so, you know, when we're talking about these economic development opportunities, some of the things that communities may want to do by right aren't in the comp plans, aren't in the zoning orders, and create this kind of confusion because people say like, hey, this isn't in the comp plan, this isn't in the zoning ordinance. Immediately they're going to go towards the kind of protectionism rather than, you know, kind of sorting out like, oh, this is something that's allowed by right. We just have to follow the proper development standards. So those are things that are really important as we talk about transitioning. What communities need to be provided resources or opportunities to kind of get comfortable with what that means and what actions need to be taken for those to become a reality.
And, for example, the Porter County Comprehensive Plan is 2001, I think. It's been a long time. We're doing one now, but this is like after you know, we're putting comprehensive plan after the planning.
Right. Well, I mean, with technology and so many of these uses that change very quickly before anyone has a chance to analyze them, you know, you're forced to be reactive and having plans updated in a way that they're small fixes rather than kind of Herculean efforts will, you know, allow these communities to be more nimble and ready for what comes their way. And knowing whether or not they want data centers or, you know, any of these uses, that's an important part of the conversation as well. So folks don't show up kind of assuming that a community would be interested because there's no indication one way or the other beforehand.
Okay. All right.
Back to the program.
Okay. The ecosystem cluster strategy, collaboration and innovation. So say there's these industrial cluster groups, ecosystem groups. So it would behoove them to evaluate potential projects. And this is just as an example, supply chain linkages or projected job growth within each group, and then develop a strategy to address them within the region. And then determine what funding mechanisms and partners may support these emerging and traditional industry clusters. So again, these are all activities within that group. And explore the possibility of holding a summit with other collaborative partners for all the identified clusters and have speakers from the Chicago Quantum Exchange, Indiana Bioworks, the Indiana Semiconductor Hub leaders, and then have cross-sector workshops to identify needs, strengths, and weaknesses within these subcluster groups here in Northwestern Indiana. Okay, and then identify areas where there's positive spillover effects, where they may be leveraged within the region. And this will encourage more industrial growth within it. And under that, joint projects and initiatives among cluster members should be developed or sought out. Funding opportunities for research and development activities with regional and state level universities as collaborative partners to broaden the training and research capabilities for advanced computing. And then determine what expertise, technology, and market information each of the cluster groups would most benefit from and make the connection to those who can provide for this information for free at a reduced cost. And identify and work closely with partner leaders within each cluster group who may serve as a unified voice for the industrial cluster and advocating for regional policies which support its growth. And then lastly, continue to help the industrial cluster ecosystem identify high-tech industrial collaborations and advanced computing and energy. Okay, then there's entrepreneurship and innovation, where NERC will support the Northwest Indiana Biz Hub's regional efforts to build and maintain a strong entrepreneurial ecosystem across Lake, Porter, and Port counties. This includes participating in regional entrepreneurship meetings in conjunction with the ISBDC. NERC will continue to support small businesses with a revolving loan fund for eligible recipients, and also support the efforts of the Northwest Indiana Forum's goals to build support systems necessary for talented and ambitious entrepreneurs. Yes?
I think the Society of Innovators at Purdue Northwest ought to have a key role.
Okay.
And it's kind of
in the entrepreneurship and innovation portion, yes.
It's kind of what we do. I mean,
there we go.
And for example, we're in discussions right now to take over management of the Biz Hub in the future. Once it's funding, it has foundation funding that's going to go away. And so we've been talking to them about where its home needs to be afterwards, and it looks like it may well be the Society of Innovators. One of the things that the Society of Innovators has volunteered to do is take on this task of working with the adjacent activities, the Semiconductor Hub, the Bioworks, and the medical devices, and even the energy, which happens to be in our region, but to work with them to find opportunities for us to build on. To kind of, who do we talk to? What do they think they need? What do we think fits some of our strengths? And begin to identify opportunities. And there may be some where they just don't exist. Which is fine. But nevertheless, we have reached out to try to identify opportunities in the adjacent economic activities that are going on.
Okay. We will add that.
I have concerns about that.
Okay.
Designating Society of Innovators, if they can perform and actually do the work, okay, yes, but to begin with the assumption that they will be able to execute the plans that they have, I think is an assumption we shouldn't be making. Just from my experience, things with ideas would be presented by small groups, individuals that overwhelm even an IBM, which was a big monster computer company at one time. Today they have a much smaller presence in the computing industry. And they're overwhelmed by people that came up out of the woodwork, essentially, with small projects that had matched the market needs at that moment.
Right.
And IBM wasn't doing it. IBM had their own concepts, they were pursuing their own agenda, and that wasn't what the market needed.
Okay.
There were dozens of individuals that popped up out of the woodwork, and some disappeared, that met the market need as it became apparent. And when the need disappeared, so did they. I think that having a Society of Innovators as being designated as the source.
Well, NERC would support the activities. I think that's.
If I could interject, we have to also remember, again, part of the purpose of the SEDS. The EDA looks at the SEDS when they evaluate funding opportunities. They require that those funding opportunities be consistent with the SEDS. So we want to be as broad as we can, whether it's the Northwest Indiana office or this Small Business Development Center that also has a gentleman that's their entrepreneurial ecosystem navigator, whether it's the Society of Innovators, whether it's the Northwest Indiana Biz Hub, whether it's Lower Lincoln, whether it's any of those organizations that are advocating to increase entrepreneurship in the region, we want to include them,
Yes.
and we want to state our support for them. I don't think in the SEDS we need to get into the nitty-gritty. That support could take the form of being a co-applicant for a grant, because maybe NERC can provide the fiscal oversight that's needed. Maybe they can assist with grant writing. It could be just providing a letter of support so that organization can seek that independently. So I think, to Gary's point, casting the net widely,
Yes.
and including everybody that participates in that area, and making a general statement of support, I think is important. I mean, one of the things I hope to do is figure out other ways that NERC can increase their value as an entrepreneurial support organization, besides just offering a loan program, but not duplicating what's already being done very effectively by other organizations. So that's a whole nother work plan in and of itself. Fortunately, there's a guidebook out there that helps you work through identifying where those gaps are. So I think the generality is good, and I think we identify as many people as we can, and there may be others that crop up within the 5 years. So there needs to be language about, even the fact that there might be some that currently don't exist that might exist.
Fair enough, then, right? So I would suggest that at least most of the organizations you mentioned have some level of track record here and have some proof of, I guess, follow through to actually make something happen. I'm a little nervous about a new, like I think you were making, I'm not sure exactly, somebody come flying out of the woodwork, they want to do something without any history or particularly history to follow through to make something actually happen. So
It's the kind of thing that people with experience in a specific market niche would recognize, that would not be appreciated by people that aren't intimately involved in developing a certain technology. I'm trying to think of examples of what it would be, but basically things, for example, a need to measure very tiny dimensions for the microcircuits. I had contact with certain researchers that that had a specific need to measure things that are on the order of 100 atoms across, controllably, predictably. Very difficult task to do. There's a very small subset of individuals that have an interest to even attempt it, but they had a need to do that.
I agree, but it sounds quite granular for relative to entrepreneurship and innovation. So.
Ironworks is a relatively new organization. So there may be others that crop up that are worthy of consideration.
I think there's an important distinction here too, and that is that entrepreneurship and innovation are not the same thing. And that, there are a lot of entrepreneurial activities that go on that are not innovative. That if someone wants to start a beauty salon or a nail salon or a car repair shop or a retail store or whatever, those are not particularly innovative, even though they're entrepreneurs. And so at the Society of Innovators, we are specifically interested as the primary activity of stimulating innovation. But in order to get innovation to market, you need entrepreneurial people. And so I think it's important to keep that distinction in mind, that we do need organizations in order to affect the kind of economic transformation that we're talking about, who are willing to take on the burden of stimulating innovation.
Okay, workforce resiliency. So this is really predicated on the idea that the region will need to diversify and specialize the regional economy to meet the potential high growth areas, particularly in emerging high-tech areas and industrial clusters. And so this will require, I think, very specialized human capital going forward. Okay, so I wanted to really kind of dive into establishing a workforce-oriented public-private partnership for emerging industries. When I looked into how the Chicago Quantum Exchange developed their talent pipeline, they used a very specific tool from the Chamber of Commerce Foundation's Talent Pipeline Management tool. So when they were looking at the quantum workforce needs for Chicago, they used this tool, and it essentially takes about 3 years to go through all of the steps of that tool to identify the specific workforce needs within the cluster areas here. All of these areas, it will take about 2 to 3 years to go through that process. And so NERC, along with other potential partners, would look at either the TPM tool or any other, there are other tools out there that can be used for emerging industries, and reach out to the ones that are within the region or the ones that are perhaps just outside the region to kind of bring together into a public-private partnership. And so there would need to be meetings organized to bring these aligned organizations together, discuss the appropriate approach to address the regional workforce needs, and to even really identify what the critical jobs are, what the skills gaps are, and really look at, starting from the technology side and then kind of bringing into the industrial cluster ecosystem groups. That might be the best approach, but it really does depend on what that group is comfortable with. And it really is collaborative, and there will need to be kind of research done to kind of bring this together, and research done within the group itself. So it really is going to take regional leadership, regional organizations, nonprofits, academia, everybody really come together. And then also to explore the implementation of appropriate next steps identified by the partnership as part of a workforce pipeline strategy. And the ultimate goal of the talent pipeline management tool, for example, is to identify what that workforce talent pipeline and the pathway, pathway strategy for developing the workforce and how that is going to really come about. So it is a very comprehensive tool. Yes?
No, just quick questions.
Yeah.
So who's taking the lead to do that?
That's it. Yes, I know. That really is going to be, I think, a discussion, between CWI. There isn't a lead organization. That's the key to get this. Yes.
I think we need to at least mention Ivy Tech in this list.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And also, I know that you see career exposure and readiness, but the biggest problem that we have, especially in dairy, is a lot of people cannot read. And if they cannot read, they cannot pass any type of industry certification. Because you must know how to read and comprehend. So that should be how are we going to bring the community up on learning how to read. That should be in here, because they cannot go from one A to B without increasing those skills, and that's it. You cannot read, you cannot pass a test, you cannot read.
No, you can't.
And if the kids are reading above the low level, that means the parents are reading below level as well.
If I could interject something, this talent pipeline management tool is a suggestion. I mean, it comes with a 300-page guidebook.
Yes, it does.
All right, it's a very deliberate methodology.
Yes, and it's free.
Yeah, that's been developed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. we have not really had an opportunity to have in-depth discussions with the Center of Workforce Innovation on whether they feel this is a tool that would be of help, whether they already have something that they're already using that is addressing the things that need to be addressed. So at this stage in the SEDS, we're saying this is a potential tool that could be used. Research it, run it up the flagpole with various partner organizations, whether that be CWI, IDTech,
Yes.
and others, and see if it has potential. And that's all we're saying, I think.
Yes, that's it. That's it.
All right?
And this is what, you know, a tool does. This is how it guides you and get what kind of end product comes out of it. But
So to Lois's point is, should this tool be used, I'm sure there is just the whole educational level and readiness component in it. I don't have the document in front of me to point you to that, but I would imagine assessing what you're dealing with is a pretty good first step in any of these. So
I just think that this tool is too advanced for Northwest Indiana. In Chicago, because I use this tool.
okay.
I just
Well,
think
you're
it's
familiar
not,
with
I think it's a little too advanced because we have a reading problem.
That's I agree with your point, but I would add a math problem too, because it's big. So if you want to give them the science, the whole STEM, STEAM, whatever. I think the point is though, if we're trying to attract these high-tech, higher-paying, more advanced businesses, we're going to have to know what their needs are. And then it's up to us to prepare a workforce or talent pool that can fulfill those jobs. And what you're talking about is a critical thing for Northwest Indiana. But that's way down at the lower level in terms of us focusing on what we're doing within our schools, within our families, communities, inspiring young people to go stretch, go farther. But this is setting the stage for opportunity relative to new businesses that we're trying to attract. So I think this is the right approach at this level, but I agree with you in terms of actually fulfilling this. It's going to take work much deeper than just identifying what the industries need.
And a lot of it's going to go back to early childhood education too.
Yeah, exactly.
Head Start and similar kinds of programs. Dealing with state policy and law and all of it, yeah. A galaxy of factors.
Because, I mean, you just don't want to bring all these new businesses and you cannot do no local hiring because the people cannot be.
I agree in terms of, because the new business, when they come in, they're going to evaluate the talent pool here. They're either going to come or they're not going to come relative to the talent pool. But if we don't identify what their needs are, we won't have any chance of getting these folks. Not even if we are able to get our young people on board with fulfilling bigger dreams than what they're focused on now.
And the data centers do have a need for those skilled individuals. They're being constructed right now in the new Carlisle area. And one thing that was kind of a surprise is they're very concerned about having their IP, their intellectual property, disappear or walk off the site. So they're interested in people that are unable to recognize what is valuable. They're unable to grab hold of the intellectual property and walk away with it. So there is some benefit in having employees that have low-level reading skills and they're not a threat.
Okay, I understand your point. We can generate and can talk about, you know, something about literacy as well. Okay, and so again, this will take, you know, partnership effort. And as Dennery pointed out, you know, CWI, other organizations, to understand what the talent pipeline is. And that way you can bring these businesses here or grow the businesses here. And this is the industry cluster and workforce ecosystem, you know, just kind of a basic level. And all of these organizations really will kind of feed into how a strategy is developed both for industrial clusters and the workforce pipeline and the workforce ecosystem. So we wanted to kind of keep this very high level to kind of help guide NERC into the organizations that they really need to touch on in order to fulfill the overall goals. Okay, any other questions about workforce resiliency?
I'd just like to make one other comment. When it comes to local government, some of these areas have no cities or towns, such as my area. So that makes the trustee the local point of contact, and the trustee often doesn't have much information about what major projects may be coming into their area. And they're expected to know that. So I don't know if there's some way that this could just be a comment, or I'm just making that comment from my perspective. So maybe from the overall perspective, incorporating information to the unincorporated areas, their leaders as well, maybe Gary, your organization could meet with the trustees, and, fill them in as to what the potential is if all these things are going to be developed in the future, so that they're maybe less surprised than some might be otherwise.
Okay.
That's all.
Yeah. Okay, and then quality of place. So this really came out of some of the work that NERC is already doing, and particularly around housing, brownfield sites, redevelopment of brownfield sites. I do recognize that there's a lot of different factors which influence quality of place that are not within these goals. But again, we're kind of focusing on the workforce and the ones that I think the EDA are really going to rally around. So housing, building awareness of NERC's housing plan for 2050 and the future, the projected housing needs, future housing needs across communities, really communicating with local governments in the region to help educate staff and elected officials on affordable housing options, and the land use needs, which will be so that they align with the overall regional goals in the housing plan, and then foster more missing middle housing, and encouraging municipalities to establish new land use categories, update their zoning, for example, how they can do that relatively easy, and also categories that permit higher densities while mandating smaller building sizes and walkable areas. And then promote the analysis, findings, and recommendations outlined in the housing plan to municipal planning staff.
Yeah. So I look at some of the descriptors, and I'm thinking that we just have to be careful about the impression that a certain adjective might have in the report.
Okay.
And I can tell you from the housing side of it, anytime a government official hears the word affordable housing, his community runs away. They run faster than running away from a data center.
Okay, we can take that word out.
My recommendation might be, instead of affordable housing, replace it with the word workforce housing.
Workforce, okay.
Because workforce housing.
It is that missing middle.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And workforce housing is a term that I think people can embrace, because now they're looking at, this is housing that's being built for me.
Yeah,
you know, whether I'm actually able to work today or not, but it's still that, it's the type of housing that is needed for the workforce that's going to supply the employees for all of these different technologies we want to bring.
Okay.
Or we can use all income housing.
Yeah,
that
or
meet all
I go
income.
back to, instead of using affordable housing, using housing affordability, just reverse the words.
Yeah.
In some cases, but you know, it's just, our community is just sensitive to that word, not because we're not embracing it, but because we know how some people get the impression that we don't want it.
I understand.
When everybody needs to have a good, safe place to live.
Yeah.
Workforce housing is one term that we said recommend using attainable housing because
Is sustainable?
attainable.
Attainable.
Reason being that workforce housing now is even terminology used when we're talking about tax credit properties and various other kind of mechanisms that are using. So when we're talking about affordable housing, are we talking about affordable market rate housing? Or are we talking about affordable housing that is either subsidized through tax credits or through other kind of mechanisms? Because, you know, one of the other things that we're seeing, you know, as well is when folks are going to do residential subdivisions now, the cost of infrastructure and the cost of land are higher than what you can build houses for. So that is forcing developers to add that premium to the housing itself. And instead of having kind of what I'd say is entry-level housing available to folks, they now have to go after a higher kind of cohort and higher income bracket in order for that to pencil out from a development standpoint, just based on kind of those other market factors. Mm-hmm. So if we're talking about affordable housing, I think what we're talking about is a bifurcation of, market rate versus truly affordable housing, when we're talking about kind of those, kind of housing
Yes.
mix, itself.
Yeah, I'm sensitive, I agree with all of this discussion, like affordable, workforce, attainable, those are all very sensitive adjectives. I kind of wonder, and in the next sentence you use middle housing, which I'm not sure exactly what that is either.
I can explain that. So this middle housing is anything from like 2 to 8 units. So not truly multifamily, not necessarily single family, maybe townhomes, it may be duplexes. It's allowing more kind of walkable density, and it's also kind of a tax policy conversation as well with local municipalities as it relates to, we're talking about 1, 2, and 3 tax rates, and the tax diversification strategy that municipalities should be looking at when they're looking at their bottom line. Because if you have a community that's solely single family residential, homeowner occupied, you have all 1% tax rate. Now from a sustainability standpoint, from a budgeting process, it's great when those communities are built out initially, but when you look at 30, 40, 50 years later, it's really hard to maintain that infrastructure and kind of accomplishing the type of civic projects, especially when it comes to parks or maintenance of roads and things of that nature. So it's also not just kind of from a land use standpoint, but also from a budgeting standpoint,
Sure.
and projection standpoint.
And also infrastructure.
Yeah.
And it's using less land, like it's more compact. They are not using the same lands like single family homes.
Sure, higher density housing.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if we might be better off just to kind of broad stroke it relative to that we need multiple forms of housing.
They use the word
And,
various instead.
or a wide range of housing options.
Yeah.
That's
And try to encourage a wide range of housing options in all communities, something along those lines, rather than identify, because it's gonna come down to a local decision anyway, whether you're gonna accept the next apartment complex or condo and what the price points is on it, so.
Rates will take.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
But I heard, us on the radio this morning, from here, well, some opposition relative to some higher end housing. Well, one of the arguments being made for even more higher end housing is that people, as they gain more wealth because of their work over years of time, they might aspire to a higher cost home, which frees up a lower cost home for somebody else in the community. I know, Joe, you hear this every day. So I just,
when we did the
that's
analysis,
my caution
when we
anyway.
did the housing analysis, we found out that we don't have also enough housing for household income over 150,000. So these people, they don't have enough supply within the region. So what's happening is taking, like less housing, less cost, and causing issue for the people making 75 to 100,000 income, household income. So it's issued, like for the low income and for the higher income. So we have to have a balance between,
It gets
the
right back
supply.
to the fundamentals of infrastructure, sanitary sewers and that sort of thing, because that, you can't go with well and septic forever
That's
without causing other issues.
Yeah, I agree with Don, on that sentiment. to, you know, kind of allow, being broader here so the conversation can happen rather than it being shut down by the basis of kind of some of the.
Yeah, so it was in the NERC plan that you got this big gap, you know, and so.
Right, yeah, you know, like, and the point about, you know, higher, you know, houses and there being some concern about that, I mean, I heard it when I worked for the city of Gary, there are, you know, senior citizens that are on fixed incomes and they're worried about people building very expensive houses next to them and how it's going to impact their property value in a positive way because it's going to increase their taxes. So there's kind of those various levers where you don't think about it initially, but folks always are looking at the bottom line when it comes to housing, you know, either positively or negatively. It really depends on their mobility, you know, as well.
So maybe the word a wide range of instead of affordable.
Yes, we will amend that,
housing
yes.
choices.
Good points.
Yes, very good. Okay, brownfields. We'll continue the work on the mitigation and remediation of brownfield sites, to build awareness of brownfield finances, sites and the regional development authorities, RDA, the revolving loan fund. Explore the development of a website with regional brownfield resources, information to be, change the language there, to local governments on the mitigation process. It would include high priority sites, redevelopment strategies, and capital ideas necessary for implementation. And then lastly, I wanted to draw attention to the importance of the land use, housing, and transit connection. So continue to plan for needed infrastructure to support walking, bicycling, and transit in locations with historic downtowns. Identify key arterial roadways, including state highways, that can be reimagined to enhance the livability. Collaborate with the RDA to establish materials which communicate the importance of transit-oriented development, transit development districts, and land uses which support existing and future transit needs. And lastly, support the RDA in its mission to build on the awareness in the region to understand the TODs and TDDs and what is required to meet the housing and transit goals.
I'm not sure this should be mentioned, but one of the frustrations of dealing with transit often is the lack of coordination.
Yeah.
You know, you think about the Missouri Public Transportation Network, and as far as I can tell, there's no meaningful effort, no effort at all to coordinate with the South Shore schedules. And
so you mean like buses?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We have different modes of transportation, and they become somewhere between inconvenient and impossible to use because of lack of coordination among them. I'm not sure that's
different agencies.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's worthy of a goal, but as we hopefully expand transit availability in Northwest Indiana, getting them coordinated.
Right. Yeah, I think it is work, but in the goals high level.
Yeah.
And it's really a connection kind of activity, a continuous connection from my home to public, to a different side of public, to getting home.
Yeah.
So to me, it should be an aspiration for us to make it connected. I'm not sure what the exact term is, but
Multimodal transportation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other question I was going to toss it.
How about coordinated multimodal transportation?
So I don't know if it fits exactly this, but it could fit some communities somewhat. And I know Nurse has your Blue Way kind of activity here too. I don't know if that fits in necessarily, except for the communities that have some water. I mean, we are trying to do more with our rivers and streams, so I don't know if there's.
A lot of that's in the 2050 plus.
It's okay. Then,
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't fit there. So.
The SEDS is primarily geared toward the broader economic development objectives. But the fact that quality of place has influence on those decisions, I think it's important. But I'd say the drill down is in the 2050 plus plan.
You know that Gary just mentioned about the transportation, because I know people have commented about if you work in Chicago and you take the train from Chicago, let's say you're doing it in reverse. You take the train from Chicago, you get off at the station, unless you have a car, you've got no way to get home.
Yes.
So the coordinated multimodal transportation options are, I think,
Also,
are important
that's
as well.
what transit-oriented development is, so that your last mile is from the transit station to your house. And that is the primary focus of the TDDs themselves, is to focus on those various housing typologies as well as jobs within the stations of the South Shore, both of the existing South Shore line as well as the West Lake, or to be called something different when it opens up. But yeah, that is, I mean, through the RDA, that is our primary focus with the TDDs, is to facilitate those very things, helping communities kind of transact on the opportunities that exist there.
I think also it's working with the private partnership, with the van pooling, and like you have like shared rides, and all of these programs will help in addition to the public transportation.
Sure.
So
Well, for example, I live in Miller, probably 3 miles from the South Shore station. And it's an incredible pain not to be able to use it without figuring out how to drive there and getting dropped off and picked up and, all that. And it's not convenient, or I don't feel it's appropriate to leave the car there for days at a time. And, so you end up kind of stuck. Just one minor example.
Pretty important one.
Okay, lastly, we're going to touch upon the evaluation. And what I'm going to say about the evaluation is it probably seems somewhat different to how you've evaluated things in the past, where you've had national or regional indicators which guide decisions, or you're trying to, I don't know, increase the labor participation rate, so you measure that over a 5-year period on an annual basis. But what we found at PCRD is that really doesn't work. And we have been charged with the evaluation of, READY in Indiana, for example, the NSF Engines regional development projects. So I tried to give this SEDS that flavor, because that is kind of the direction we're going in. So it's really predicated on having those cross-sector partnerships and stakeholder engagement focus in order to build that ecosystem, in order to engage firms and nonprofit organizations across the board to achieve your goals. That's the main thrust of this SEDS. So for example, I have put together the metrics that you should measure. And we actually have a spreadsheet that is not within this draft SEDS, but we're developing it as part of the appendices, so that, for example, the number of identified potential industrial clusters and entrepreneurial partners that can be looked at on a quarterly basis. The number of industrial cluster members just even contacted. How many are you in regular contact with? How many are involved in the ecosystem cluster building efforts? How many have responded to outreach efforts? If you have an engagement session, some kind of a meeting, how many attend these meetings? How many meetings have you had with external partners or internal partners? How many people attend these meetings? That's one way to kind of gauge whether you're effectively building the network and the ecosystem that you need.
Shouldn't it maybe be NERPC or NERPC partners? I mean, for example, I think of the Society of Innovators. We do a lot of outreach into the Chicago innovation ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
We sponsor multiple events here in Northwest Indiana. I was at one last night that we sponsored. And, and it seems to me that those ought to count.
Well, here's the difficulty with that, is that might be very difficult for Denery to have all of the meetings from all of the partners and be able to get all of that data from all the potential partners.
But at least historically, NERPC is not going to do a lot to convene the meetings that you're talking about.
But for example, if NERPC is one of the members of that meeting, or if they attend, that is one way that they can add those numbers.
Okay,
Do you see what I'm saying?
not really, but okay. Because I don't think it hasn't worked that way in the past. I mean,
Well, this is a much different sense.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a much different. I mean, I view my role at NERC as figuring out how to build these industry cluster ecosystems.
Sure.
Okay, realistically, I view us as secondary on the workforce development side. I view our transportation planner, our land use planner, and other staff members as focusing on the quality of place things. I think as the Economic Development District Coordinator, the gap right now is that we've really not had plan, if you will, to build these industry clusters, and that's going to take some time. There may be plenty of quarters where there's zero
That is
reported
true.
by me on
Yes.
some of these.
Okay.
Um,
But that doesn't mean that there
It doesn't
aren't
mean it's not
connections
going
being,
on.
for example.
That's right, it
Yeah,
does, that's right.
And so I know how this has to get reported to the EDA,
Yeah.
and it's in a once-a-year annual report.
Mhm.
So what I can do though, Gary, is say, irrespective of the ecosystem metrics that we've reported, we are aware through our participation that more activity has been done by our partner organizations, such as the Society of Innovative Health 32 events, or whatever it might be.
Okay.
So that way, we're only responsible for tracking what we as an organization have to do, but it doesn't mean we can't reflect other people's work in a more informal way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
So the point, relative to, you brought up exactly the point I was thinking about was this. I went through a number of these cluster exercises, and I'm routinely looking for data on clusters. What I find is when I try to get down to the number of local businesses in a cluster, it's hard to identify which cluster they're actually in. Because when I look at some clusters, like, okay, is there 500 people in that cluster, or there's, or sorry, 500 employees in that cluster, or is it 10,000? And if I was trying to get the cluster leaders into the room, could I even identify who they were? So the broad numbers tend to be out there by kind of self-classification from workforce development. When I try to get granular in terms of who's in which cluster, it's all over the map.
It is.
Well, we
It
actually
is.
got listings of companies like.
For all of the clusters
For all the clusters identified.
that were identified,
Oh,
yeah.
I'd love to see
Yes,
that, yeah.
I got happy, but what we found is that there was a lot of overlap with what was there between.
I mean, some people, they reported multiple clusters too. I just say I love the idea. I just found it to be problematic. So you've got it.
Yes, yeah, it's out there.
I mean, I can give you an example for another project. We were looking at primary metal manufacturers, not associated with NERC at all. And one of the construction companies actually was within that cluster because they use steel products. They don't make steel, they don't have anything to do with the making of metals, but because they use it, they're included within that cluster
Well,
definition.
and we found that in the chemical cluster, one of the leading companies was a distributor.
Yeah.
It's gonna take a lot of digging
Yeah, I was
down.
gonna say.
Well, you have to sort through it, the details are there, but you
Yeah.
have to.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's gonna be the key challenge for the next 18 months.
It is.
Clearly identifying who those industries are, who the appropriate contact person is, and then convincing them of the value in participating in building this ecosystem.
But the other thing I found problematic was to prove the growth in that cluster. So, is the distribution company that identifies as that, is that
Exactly.
all part of the same growth or not? I mean, maybe it is.
And I can tell you too that the future of clusters is going to get even more complicated because we're working within that space. So right now we're thinking about clusters as not only the location quotient, the number of jobs, but also measuring it based on skills and skill sets. So it's going to become more multidimensional, and the EDA is trying to move regional bodies into a workforce space.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so workforce development. So, for example, number of identified potential workforce development partners at the regional level, number of firms contacted to be part of an ecosystem development effort, and emerging talent pipeline and pathway effort, number of firms committed to workforce development effort in emerging industries. So what we're trying to do is really build upon what NERC can capture and what sort of outputs NERC is seeing from these activities.
I think this one is going to take some serious discussion with CWI. I really do. So we may have to have another conversation.
Okay. And by the same token, for governance and management, so number of grant applications submitted with partners. Again, this could be, here we're submitting a letter of support. That would count. So it wouldn't have to be exactly grant writing or spearheading or being the primary on a grant application, but how many grant applications are NERC collaborating on that have to do with any of these industrial clusters, workforce development, or quality of life. Yes?
Good question. On the governance and management, is it tracking what NERC is doing, or is it tracking what recipients may be doing?
What NERC is doing.
Okay.
So right now, historically, since they've become an EDD, the primary task has been building awareness that these grant opportunities are even out there.
Sure.
Most of the applicants, so we had one grant that was awarded to the University of St. Francis. They did their own grant writing. The City of LaPorte was awarded a grant for infrastructure through the EDA. They did their own grant writing. What we have primarily done is explain to other entities what's involved in seeking an EDA grant, what they can qualify for, and then putting them in touch with our economic development rep, who's really kind of the point of contact to help flush out the particulars associated with the grant so they can advise them on what's most competitive, assuming they can qualify. I envision that will continue. I honestly don't envision that, first of all, the applicant has to provide the financial match. We don't have the financial match. We have been asked in the past to be an applicant where somebody else pledged the financial match. We were not awarded that. So I think some of these scenarios will play out on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Yeah, I was just, if it's NERC, then I have no comments. I was just curious if it's, talking about specific entities and, tracking on the government side.
Oh, no.
Okay. Just, yeah, I know. That's why I was asking the difference.
Yeah. Okay. So that is the draft SEDS. It will be posted online today. We will also have a link if you want to post any comments on the SEDS. That will be available as soon as this is posted. And so, I will take into everything that you said during this meeting today. We will make those changes, but the final SEDS won't be ready until the meeting of May 15th. Yeah, May 15th.
So the way the 30-day comment period works is Annie and I will be having calls weekly. will be evaluating the comments that come in
Yes.
online through the link. And then there'll be
We'll
adjustments
discuss
and edits made throughout that 30-day period.
Yes. And Kaiwan has been taking notes of our discussion, so we can provide those to you as well. Maybe not be posted alongside the draft sets, but, for disbursement among this group.
That's the overview, and Henry, on page 3 and 4, we have the resolution. Are we ready to have any discussion on that?
Yeah, this committee has to decide if they'd like to forward a recommendation to the executive board.
Oh, and one of the members, I'll need to have a motion to do so. So I entertain a motion.
So is it not like, I'm not going to amend necessarily, but should be very good.
So
is it final form or not? So that's, I would
It's
think
the
that
draft.
we're going to make a recommendation to the board.
It's a draft for a 30-day comment period. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll motion.
Okay, we have a motion from Jen. And do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Okay, well, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on this motion?
So question, so this is dated May 15th. So is this what we're voting on, adopting, or are we voting on?
You're not adopting this.
No.
You're basically forwarding a favorable recommendation to the body
Of the
that
draft?
actually,
Right.
yeah.
To the full NERC body?
Yeah, the motion is for approval to forward a resolution 2506 to the commission for passage, which approves the adoption for 2025 sets with a favorable recommendation.
Okay. And that would be as amended as we talked today, correct? Okay.
And also the public comments.
Yeah,
If
They will have all of the public comments.
Yeah, all the public comments.
They will publish those in the appendix, yeah.
I'm just recommending making that part of the motion then.
So Jen, do you want to amend your motion?
Yeah, do you want to amend the motion as stated?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so the motion as stated is to include the comments from today and the 30-day comment period, and that is what we're requesting for favorable recommendation from this committee to forward that resolution to the commission for passage, which would approve the adoption based on all the above.
All right.
I don't want to split hairs, but we
Go ahead.
don't know what's going to come in those 30-day comment period.
Mm-hmm.
All we know is what was discussed today. And there may be comments that are given to us during the 30-day comment period that are totally irrelevant.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Jen's motion should be amended to say
I think that's a
it
good
reflects today's discussion only. Now, as
Well-
we go through the 30-day comments, we'll have to sort out what's relevant and what's not.
Yeah.
Well, then how do we state this motion so that
Well, I
it
think
makes...
you just reflect today's discussion, and then.
Well, today's discussion would include your comments about evaluating the comments from the comment period.
Right, I guess the question, what's the purpose of the 30-day comment period? Who's gonna be reviewing those for inclusion in the report or not? How does that work?
Annie and I will be reviewing those.
On a
Ty will,
weekly basis, yeah.
yeah, Ty will also be reviewing them.
Well,
And
this
then the
committee,
commission will be presented with what's essentially a
but the
final.
favorable recommendation won't reflect.
So we won't know what the final says is, right?
I think, you know, once you make any changes or modifications based on today's discussion and the public comment discussion, you update the report and send it to the committee so they will be familiar. And also you have to have a public comment reports. So all the questions that comes and you answer to these questions, either yes, no, or modifications, we have to take that to the commission when we adopt it, showing the public comments, and it has to be sent to the committee before the adoption.
So we're approving this resolution with those comments to go forward based on the overall.
I'm just having a hard time understanding the process, because if we're sending a favorable recommendation to approve the SEDS, we don't even know what the final version is yet.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It has to be, once they update.
So don't we have to have another committee meeting to make that favorable recommendation after those?
No, you're approving the SEDS with today's comments incorporated. You're basing your favorable recommendation on that. You may get 100 public comments, you may get 0 public
we
comments.
We understand that. But
so what will happen is there'll be an appendix to this that will list all the public comments received and how they've been resolved, okay? And that will come at the end of the 30 days. We can distribute that to all the committee members, just like we'll distribute it to all the commission members.
So is this document gonna change or not?
Yes.
Yes.
The document will change.
So not
be
just an
sent to us
appendix,
highlighted.
it's not just an appendix, you're going to change some of this word.
Based on today's discussion.
meeting.
What about the public comments? Are you gonna change the document based on public comment?
It depends on what they are.
So what if the comments say, we don't want pharmaceuticals in the clusters?
Well, then we might have a problem. We might have to step back. We don't
So
know
at what
these
point do we get involved again, or are we done after today?
I would say if the public comments come back and say, this is contrary by whatever measure and to what we think this document should be, we'll have to figure out if that's a valid complaint, if it's something that we need to bring back to the committee. I just don't know, Joe, because I don't know what the level of public
Yeah, but it
comments
seems
is.
to me that we need to meet again to see what we're favorably recommending to the
I don't have a problem recommending the draft in its form. I have a problem with recommending something that I haven't even know what the final version is gonna be yet.
I think if there is a major issue that we cannot handle from the public comment, we should just call a special board meeting for discussion.
That's a possibility.
Yeah.
We won't know what until we get them.
I would be surprised, based on my experience, if there's anything alarming that comes out of the public comments.
It's likely that we get 0 comments.
It's
Maybe
very
2
possible.
or 3.
Yeah.
There's always the what if. I always go to the worst
I agree
case
with
scenario.
you.
Yeah.
I'm not
So-
disagreeing.
What if there is a major change and now we've gone through all of this and we've got the draft and all of a sudden our consultant and staff make a decision that's contrary to what we've already adopted?
Okay, so should we amend the,
I would make a motion that we approve the draft form with today's comments, and that after the public comment period is over, if there's anything of significance with significant changes, that this group reconvenes to
I think
do a
that
final
would
vote.
probably take care of it,
Okay.
would it not?
I'll second that.
Okay.
I'll look at
Okay,
that.
so we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any further discussion? No further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Hearing none, the motion passes. Okay, so we have a favorable recommendation. Would you like to discuss the public comment period, or have we gone over that already?
We just need your action to approve posting the SEDS on the NERC's website for a 30-day period.
Well, we need a motion then to approve, to post the SEDS on the NERC website for 30-day public comment period.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion from Joe. Second from Lois. Thank you very much. Is there any discussion? See you done. Okay, hearing no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Okay. Okay, the next, our next meeting will be July 9th, 2025 at 10 a.m. Put that in your calendars. Say again?
I wanna announce.
Okay, all right, we won't adjourn yet, but I want to also note that the April 9th, 2025 meeting has been canceled. So there will be no April 9th Economy in Place Committee meeting. Thank you for letting me know that, because I'm pretty sure I have it on my calendar. All right, and, Eman?
Yeah, we have a handout here we have a workshop, this coming Tuesday. We have two workshops, one, April 8th from 4:30 to 7, and one on April 22nd, same time, 4:30 to 7 p.m. So that's based on the Sensible Tools Handbook that NIPSI developed here that can help local governments, developers, any interested citizens to know more and learn about planning and best practices of planning and all the sensible tools. So the first workshop is based on planning, land use, and how to make the right decisions in any application that comes to a plan commission, zoning boards, or even the town or city council members. So we will show the tools, we will have interactive examples showing people how to look at a development and how to use, some of the tools and questions and checklists to make a right decision. So you can share it with anyone, and we have some copies here. It's already listed online, so if you are interested.
For members and those on the committees?
Anyone,
Okay.
Plan commissioners, zoning boards, planners,
Okay.
town council members.
People on county.
Yeah, people that
committees and-
review or make decisions about even for developers, people.
The township boards and
Yeah,
township, okay.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much.
Registered so far, How many people have registered so far?
For the first one, we have 17, as I heard last time.
I think it was 18, but now I think it's 17.
Yeah, 17 for the first one, and we have, I think, 13 for the second one. Yeah.
Okay, is there any further discussion of anything? Open discussion? Hearing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you very much for being here, appreciate it, great discussion.
So Joe, my understanding is if there is